New explosive details have emerged about a cruise ship continuing to sail worldwide despite knowing about the coronavirus threat. A new report by the Washington Post exposes how the industry appeared to downplay early warnings and proceed with normal operations. Thousands of cases have been reported aboard ships and dozens of passengers have died from the virus. The Post featured one American woman who was aboard a cruise ship during the early days of the pandemic.
People are a little nervous about the COVID-19 panic that's going on throughout the world. Had messages on Cruise Critic this morning that someone was taken off the ship yesterday with respiratory illnesses. I don't think that's true. I saw the ambulance leaving. There was no masks on the people that were working.
So Washington Post reporter Rosalind Helderman worked on that story, and she joins us now. Rosalind, it's a great piece. There's also, for people who, I don't know if you want to read, if you don't want to read, but there's a video that goes with it that really tracks one particular cruise ship and how it was able to pass the infection on to multiple locations within the Caribbean. And that's just one cruise ship. There are many more cruise ships doing those routes. So let's talk about this. The question that kept on bubbling up to me is, it's obvious that cruise ships are tailor-made for the spread of a virus like this. We've seen the norovirus and the way it can spread on a cruise ship. Why, in the midst of the growing concern about the coronavirus, were these cruise ships permitted to sail?
Yeah, it's a really great question. People may remember that one of the very sort of early dramas of coronavirus was this enormous cruise ship in Japan, the Diamond Princess, where ultimately more than 700 people tested positive, and that was way back in February. But the industry kept saying they could make this safe. They could clean the ships, they could do some temperature checks and health screenings of passengers. And, they employ a lot of people. They also have some key officials who are close to the White House in the United States. And they insisted that they should be able to keep cruising. And so they did. It wasn't until March 13th, 2 days after coronavirus was declared a global pandemic, that the industry finally stopped new sales. And by that time, there were dozens of ships already out at sea with thousands of people aboard.
It's fascinating. And Rosalind, you and your fellow Washington Post reporter spoke with a number of cruise ship passengers and crew members, some of whom tested positive for the virus. What were their reactions to your investigation?
Well, there was a lot of disappointment, of course. I mean, really, I think one of the more sort of shocking or upsetting examples of this is that there are a number of ships where people were struggling to get home after the no sail order was put in place. And they were out on these ships for lengthy periods of time, being told by the ships that there was no coronavirus on board. We had an example of one ship where they did daily activities, including gathering to cheer for healthcare workers, shoulder to shoulder, packed together, hundreds of people, and they weren't safe. There was coronavirus on that ship, and several hundred people, it appears, have now tested positive from that ship alone.
So the CEO of Carnival has been really sort of out front defending the industry. His name is Arnold Donald, and he responded to the Washington Post report. Let's play a little bit of his response.
There was very little knowledge, starting early on in February and March and whatnot. We aggressively managed it as we do any illness on board.
Okay, so it occurred to me, Rosalind, that I think, his responses have kind of been evolving a little bit. He was sort of essentially saying, we did everything possible, we followed all guidelines, and now I'm starting to hear him say, well, no one knew anything about, what the potential was here. What's your take on his response?
Yeah, I mean, the industry started off being quite defensive. There's another interview where that same executive talked about how cruise ships are not places where you would be more likely to catch it than on shore. He compared a cruise ship to Central Park, where you could naturally socially distance. And the scientists, including from the CDC, say that just isn't true. What we've got is thousands of people in very tight quarters for lengthy periods of time, many of them on the older side of the population, being brought from place to place. And they say the reality is that just is an elevated risk that needs to be addressed. And just in recent days, we started to hear some cruise ship executives, we spoke to one from Royal Caribbean, for instance, talking about how, there do have to be some lessons learned from this experience. If you don't think that, you've got to be more humble than to think there are no lessons to be learned here.
And Rosalind, one other interesting point in your article, you mentioned this political backdrop to all of your investigation. What's been the White House's reaction to cruise ships continuing to sail despite the coronavirus threat? And I wonder, are there any links between the Trump administration and the cruise ship industry from the president on down?
Yeah, I mean, the president comes from the hospitality industry. He is familiar with this world. He's familiar with some of these executives, in particular. Carnival, which is the world's largest cruise ship owner, actually was a sponsor for some time of The Apprentice, and there were episodes that featured mentions of Carnival. And so President Trump, at the start of this, in the period of time where he was sort of downplaying coronavirus, would speak very, very much of his desire to make sure the industry kept sailing and that it was not harmed by this. Other executives within the government, other officials, grew upset with this and thought that what the industry was doing voluntarily was not sufficient. And so ultimately, the CDC did step in and order the cruise lines to stop sailing. They've extended that no-sail order, so they are now not allowed to sail in U.S. waters until sometime in the summer. But the real test is going to be what happens then.
All right, Rosalind Helderman, really great article. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.